Hi, it's Jared from Strongroots Farm. We're back with another great video, and today we're going to talk about a loading chute for whatever animals you really have on your farm. Today we're mostly going to talk about cattle and spacing and sizing. That is the number one thing I think everybody has questions with. At least when I was building mine, that's what I worried about. So that is going to be the first point we go over today. I'll also talk about the structure. So what materials I use, some things that I learned, how to do this a little cheaper, a little better versus buying a $6,000 all steel pre-made system. If you're looking to design something and make something for yourself, I'll show you how to do that today. And lastly, I'm also going to talk about how you can adapt these for multi-species, which we do. We load different species of animals into the same trailer, but different species come through the same chute. How do you make something available for sheep, hogs, and cattle, all with just one system on your farm? I'll talk to you about that today as well. Stick around, I'm going to go through it all. Thanks for joining us. Glad to have you here on the channel today as we talk about loading chutes or loading systems on your farm. The number one object is to be able to load your animals safely with low stress. And so that's all about the animal. And then the third thing is for you is ease of loading. Can you load, how many people does it take? 2, 3, 4? Do you do it by setting up gates, or is it already preset for you? So today I'm going to show you our system. I can load animals by myself, but it does become much, much easier with 2 people. One person working the sliding gate on our trailer, and then me running animals down the chute. But if I had to do this over again, I would design something a little different, which I'll go through in this video. But today we're going to talk about all of those things, and with all of that in retrospect, how do you do it safely? Most of this stuff, most of my knowledge comes from Temple Grandin's book and watching her videos. That is who we mimicked our system after. If you haven't seen stuff on her, she is definitely the expert on safe handling systems for animals. I encourage you to look. She has a movie on Amazon. She has a book out there, and there are plenty of videos listening to her speak. She has revolutionized this industry as far as it comes to loading systems and animals. But today we're talking about your small homestead or farm. How do you build one for yourself? All right, so first I'm going to talk about the measurements, because that is what I had the most trouble with. When I was researching how to do this, not only did I use her book and her videos, but I researched all kinds of stuff from universities. What should be the size? They have 2 different main systems that they give size for cattle. And so we'll talk about cattle first. And there's a V system. So the bottom is tighter than the top. And then there's a straight up and down wall system. So if you look at different university studies, you're going to find 2 different measurements. As we look at ours today, just go ahead and break out the tape. We are right at 31 inches wide. Now I did walk down through our loading chute here, and 31 inches is the widest spot. The thinnest spot that I have is 28 inches. And so I will tell you, I think I made it a little too wide for our situation here. So you need to kind of understand that. Hogs, which is the smallest animal, we don't have any sheep or goats here on our farm. We do run hogs down through this. So it is a little bit too wide for small pigs. So if you're selling piglets, you should be able to carry those by hand. Or if you're selling 150-pound piglets, this is a little bit wide. They will get turned around in that. But what I have found, if I run them all at one time, large butcher-ready animals, 260 to 300 pounds, they do fairly well in this. But if I was only going to run sheep, goats, and pigs, I would scoot this into probably 24 inches wide. But I needed a multi-species system that I could run cattle through, as well as my hogs that we would butcher later for meat. As far as our cattle, we would run what most people would consider a mid-framed cow-calf. So my cows, my preference on weights are somewhere between 12 and 1,300 pounds. That is ideal. Now I have had cows as little as 1,100 and as big as 1,500, but our cattle here aren't very large 2,000-pound cows and bulls. If you're running a very large pregnant animal, this 31, 32 inches is probably a pretty good setup for you width-wise, even though wait around towards the end of the video, I'll talk about how I would design this different if I was only running cattle. The other thing we run here is butcher steers and heifers. We butcher animals. They're coming through here at 1,100 to 1,400 pounds. They fit just fine through here. They cannot turn around, and it is not too tight for them. It could be 28 inches wide everywhere, and they would fit just fine. So if your animals aren't breaking 1,300 pounds, even if they're pregnant, they will go through 28 inches just fine. And the tighter that they are actually is better. It makes them go a little slower. They can kind of rub the sides as they work their way through, and they're less apt to back up. But ultimately, if you're wider, 30, 32 inches, and they don't even rub and they come through, that is a fine system as long as they can't turn around. The other risk, if you have higher stressed animals, now we do daily rotational grazing, our animals are used to them. We can pretty much touch most of our animals here on the farm in an open pasture. They won't run away from us. So we don't have high stress animals, but if it was too wide and you had a high stress animal, they could want to go vertically, okay? So that is a negative thought. So how tall are we? That's our next measurement. We are right at 6 foot tall all the way around. I bought 8.5 foot fence posts, sunk them 2.5 foot into the ground. Some places I'm a little bit shorter than that. I'm, right at just below 6 foot tall, but most of this is 6 foot tall. I think anything over 5.5 foot tall, you will be fine at. How about length? As far as I'm concerned, as long as I have about 15 feet prior to the entry of my truck, I don't have a problem with length. You can have any length that you want. I'm going from the back of my building here all the way up to my truck. So the building and the facilities that you have, wherever you're coming from and how you're sorting, that's really going to determine the length of your chute. And obviously the shorter the better, simply due to cost. So if you want to run 8 cows in at one time, 10 cows, 20 cows, whatever it's going to be, whatever your trailer will hold, it is better to load all at once versus loading one at a time. I will tell you that. So whatever you're wanting to load at one time, that will determine how much length of run you have from the entry lock gate. And what I mean by that is where they come in, there is a gate that I shut that does not allow them to go back out, so none of them can back out, and we work our way around. But if you have at least 10 or 15 feet, you can easily load 3, 4, possibly even 5 at a time, which is usually the split gate system in a standard livestock trailer. So we'll load 4 or 5 at a time, push them up, shut the gate into the front of our trailer, and then bring the next 4 or 5 in if we're gonna haul an entire trailer load. And there's 2 cut gates, so we can haul 18 at a time in our trailer. Since we're on the case of measurements, I wanna go ahead and talk a little bit about what I would do differently if I only had cattle, okay? So if I was only loading cattle, this is a standard 1 animal width to load through a rear slide door, right? If you can see that picture. If I was only loading cattle into a standard livestock trailer, this is not the width that I would go. I would go with the width of my trailer door. In fact, instead of having a gate here for a slide door, I would use the wide cut gate as my loading. So it's fine to go with this standard width into your loading chute or squeeze chute for vet stations or whatever you would have to rotate them around. Maybe you have an arched, like our gateway here is arched. If you arch them around through a chute like this, but prior to the truck, I would widen that thing to 6 feet. And I would have some cut gates in there where that I could open the gate of my trailer, which the gate of my trailer would open this way. My very next gate, I would have open the opposite way where it would swing all the way around 180 degrees, and I could bring those gates together and it would touch the back gate of my trailer in this section. That way I could open the back gate, shove all of them up. They have more room to jump up into the trailer, and then I'm squeezing them, bringing that back gate around and shutting that entire back gate of my trailer if I'm only loading cattle. More like a stockyard setup or a sale barn setup if that's what you're used to. I have found people that have a wider setup like that, and even some pens where they open a gate and let them in from that pen. They're bringing them one at a time through a head gate into a pen and then loading them all at once. that seems to be a safer, calmer setup where they all go at once. Once one goes, they all get the idea they're going, and that seems to be a better system versus having them stand here and waiting for that, all of them going nose to butt. And then once that one goes through the slide door, then they'll go, but it's a little bit more, and I have to have somebody working the slide gate, because the negative to this system is if one comes back out of the trailer, out of that slide gate, if my slide gate girl in this instance doesn't do her job and slide that shut after the last one, we got a bad day. We got to take them all the way back out and loop them back around and come back through here when one goes out of here the wrong way. It has happened, and you really got to fight. You really are going to add stress to an animal. If you've got one coming head first and one going out of that truck, it really could make a bad day. So that's why if I'm only doing cattle, I would make this 6 foot wide for at least 1 or 2 gate sections prior to my trailer. It just seems to be a better system, and I like that a little bit better now that I have got a really nice system like this. That's just really what I've learned. The last thing that has to do with measurements is you'll see these sideboards over here that are running along. What happens is that when it's 6 foot tall and you have somebody that's helping you, they can't see over. So they have to have something to stand on to be able to get up over and touch an animal, right? And so I would recommend some people have platforms. That little 1x6 rough cut that's just looped around, 1x6s bend fairly well in our arch, as you'll see in a minute. But having something that they can step up on to see in, that is important, because we used metal so they couldn't see out. And that was a Temple Grandin standard, that the stress is raised when they see out and see movement and hear noise. We tried to limit that with that metal, as you'll see in the material, but having something that you can step up over. The one negative for having a tall loading chute like this that has metal on the side that they can't see out is if you're in there pushing them, you can't get out. So we'll talk about that here in a minute, but I want you to recognize that there is pros and cons to having a board fence. Like you see, my last 10 feet is board fence here, where we can stick a rod in from the outside. It's mainly so that I can climb my butt over when I get the last one shoved in. But that's a negative of the metal sidings like we have. Let's talk about materials now. All right, so you'll notice we're on the back side of the loading chute, obviously, but you'll notice we did a 3 foot section of metal right at the eye line. So it went from 6 foot down to 3 foot. They may be even a little bit longer. I think those were 7 foot sheets when we bought them. We bought whatever was cheap and whatever color was cheap because it was going to get beat up by animals. But the importance is you don't want to go from ceiling to floor, okay? At some point, you need to be able to see the animals from the outside, whether that's you see their head bobbing above, which I don't think is the best situation, because if you can see their head, they can most likely see you. So what we decided to do was to go hog panels, the really hard wire that we bought at TSC. We bought the 48-inch sheets and then took a cutting saw and cut those. We put that at the bottom so we can see their feet. Their eyes don't see us. They can't see us. They never put their head down and look out and get scared. They're going through. And so they can't see us, but we can see where they're at. And I think that's important. So we used fence posts. As you can see, these are 4-5s, they call them. They're in that section somewhere between 4 and 5 inches around. We put them every 8 feet. I even put a T-post in between. That was more for the wire underneath for pigs than it was for holding cattle. I don't really think, they're not even screwed to the boards there. I don't think the T-posts are really helping us much. I'm not sure I would do that again. But anywhere between 6 and 8 feet, you could even go 4 feet if you wanted to be super strong, is your fence posts. We did a small curve. You wanted to be able to see at least 10 foot around in our curve. So as I was stepping this off, I used garden hose, just kind of like I was doing landscaping, to get my arch set. We painted the ground, and then we started driving our posts. And then we used rough cut lumber 1x6, which we screwed our metal to. The metal does help with making it stronger, but it is really not there as the strength to hold in the animal. They can bust through that, kick through it. Not really. I don't know if their hoof would just poke a hole in it, but they can dent it. It's been dented because they're going through here. But the metal helps, but really the structure that is holding them in is that 1x6s, right? So we did 3 rungs, 3 or 4. If you're not gonna put metal on, I would probably do 5 if you're gonna do a 2 foot buffer at the bottom with that wire. I think that's a good setup, and you could only use wood, but this is how we put it together. So we got our hog panel wire at the bottom, nailed to our post, and then wrap tied to our T-posts all the way down through there. They're zip tied together fairly well with wire, I guess. Some places we use the wire wrap, some places we use zip ties. And then our 1x6s are screwed with a big decking screw into our posts, and then we used metal screws into our metal, and you do need to see that. So we used the standard barn metal screw with your rubber washer that you put all your barn metal up with. Everybody uses them. But I had to think about this because this screw, if it was in a wrong location, an animal could get scratched. I don't want to scratch an animal and stress an animal right on the way to butcher. We definitely don't want to do that. The other thing is this metal lip. If it was facing the wrong direction and could be pulled out, if an animal pulled on it, one, they're going to tear up your loading chute. Two, they could injure themselves. So as I was coming up with how are we going to screw all this on and how are we going to layer metal, I started at the front, the exit door where you saw before. I started at the front of the loading chute and worked my way back. That way my lip was always coming towards the exit. So as they're coming out this way, they're pushing on the opposite way, the lip. Their body never runs on the lip. That's the first thing. The second thing is this screw head is on the exit side right against the rib. It's on the flat technically, but their body is going to hit this rib before it rubs this screw. So essentially this rib is preventing them from getting scratched by this screw head. I thought that was very important. I would definitely do that again. We have never had an animal scratched. We've never had a problem. They do rub against the ribs, and I kind of like the ribs. It touches them and slows them down, but it's not squeezing them like if you only had boards. The other thing to think about when you're coming up with your measurements though is that this is a 1-inch rib on each side. So you're losing 2 inches by putting barn metal on versus just wood. So your posts need to be acclimated and moved for that. So when I did my 28 to 30 inch measurement that I'm telling you I think is the best size for our situation, that was from inside of rib to inside of rib. So 28 at the skinniest point was here. They really had 30 inches if we're talking about the flat. So it's just kind of like a buffer rubbing pin basically as they go past. I really like that, but that's what we did with our screws to protect our animals. Now today we're really talking measurements and material, but I did an entire walkthrough on this system where I show you the sorting system behind the barn. As we go into our loading chute, our vet station, I go through all of that. It looks like an icon like this in the video, but it will also be down in the description if you would like to see an entire walkthrough of this system. But to give you a quick overview, right here is our turn. So we got a half moon turn swing gate that pushes them into the metal there. They come down our metal and they can go into our barn here and go into our vet station, or they can come around and go straight to our truck. They could also, we have a gate in the middle here, which let's just go look at that. So as they come down this alley, there is a gate. Right now it is set up to come out of the barn. So as they went into the squeeze chute, they would come out of the barn and go down this alleyway towards our truck with the way it's set up right now. That gate could be swung the other way. And so if we didn't need to use the squeeze chute, if we weren't doctoring or doing something with checking or castrating, if we were just simply loading, we would shut that and run them straight down through here. You see the gate here that I'm standing against. This allows us to use this loading system to go ahead and work animals through our squeeze chute, but then bring them back in the yard, not necessarily load them into a truck. And so that gate opens up against that wall, and then they simply come back out here into our feed area where our barn is at. To give you a better view of the turn, this is what the cattle are seeing. So when either they come out of the barn or they come out of the straight section, this is the angle of turn. My goal was to see 12 or 16 feet in front of them. They see enough room to continue to want to go, but they can't even see the truck at this point, which is only another 25 or 30 feet up in front of us here. So that's how much area we wanted them to see. That is kind of the goal when you're putting out your garden hose and making your arches. If you make it tighter than that, they won't want to go. If they can't see further than 6 or 8 feet, they'll kind of get stopped and slow down. When they come to this point, they always start walking slower and they're always watching. And as long as they can continue to see the around further to the end, they'll continue to move. Behind the barn, this is our sorting system that you'll see in the other video if you watch it. And it's kind of growed up a little bit now with the summer weeds. But this is kind of where we sort and we get pushing them into our chute. If I was to do this over, this is more like the setup that I would set up if I was only running cattle. They're 12 foot wide here. We would sort it 12 foot wide, and then we would push down or around a corner to a 6 foot wide section. And I would have one gate that would swing into my truck, and then probably another 16 or 18 feet back, another 6 foot gate where I could pin them up in that section and then load that group of 4 or 5 or how many ever I wanted to load at one time all through at once. I do not like loading one at a time. It can be done. It's nice if you're vetting them and then putting them on a trailer, but it's pretty rare for us. It is much easier if they go as a herd. They're much less stressed. There is one thing else we need to talk about. What if you're big and you need to load a bunch? So our current chute comes up and it raises 6 inches here at the ground just to get them a little bit closer to the trailer height. That's more for the hogs and smaller animals than it is for cattle. Cattle don't need that. But if I'm gonna load a bunch of animals, and by a bunch, I'm talking, I wanna load 40 to 50 at a time, I'm gonna build a chute system like this, skinnier. So why? Well, the main reason is versatility. So if you build you a system like this, like we have, and you run a bunch of head, on your standard days, you can back your standard cattle trailer, whether it's 16 foot out to 30 foot, you can back the standard cattle trailer and load here. But if you want to load 40, 50, you're going to have a semi, and semis can't load from this height. They need a ramp. So if I was going to build my own system, I would build it at this width, and then I would buy a movable pre-made ramp that I could move over in front of this, perhaps make some kind of bracket to pin it to my fence posts, and that is what I would use to ramp them up into a semi. Well, that's big guy problems though. And I say all that because if you're a big guy and you're in that situation, I will tell you there is disadvantages to making your own system. Okay, buying a pre-made system has pre-made angles, they're stronger, their latches are easier, they typically have a better way in and out, and these guys have engineered and built systems that work every time. If you're building your own systems, there will always be something like our system that you might want to change, which is hard to do when you just spent thousands of dollars building your own loading system. Now, I will tell you, this system, if I would have purchased it, would have cost around $16,000. I priced one with a metal chute from our sorting system that was a fence, just the metal sweep chute, and then gates set up to go into our squeeze chute in the barn, and then to have a loading chute to end up where we are at today was $16,000. We spent around $2,400 on this system that we built. But if you're a big guy and you're loading semis, it's probably worth the money. You can amortize it out over much more head and you can depreciate it down. It will pay for itself with efficiency and with lifelong use. And with those pre-made systems, they are movable. So if you want to change something, it's easier to make changes with those pre-bought, pre-made engineered systems. Well, there you have it. I hope that video helped. I really wanted to give the measurements. I had a lot of questions about that, show you some of the materials. Like I said, that video will be down in the description. If you want to see a full walkthrough where I take you through a vet station, that is one major thing I would have made changes to in our system, not just the entry width, okay? So the squeeze chute is very important. I think if you're going to raise cattle, it is a necessary item that you have a head chute, a squeeze chute of some sort in order to give proper health corrections to your animals, whether that be from a vet or from yourself. Well, thanks for watching. Please hit that like button. It really does help our channel out as we try to grow our channel. Until next time, we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.
Please like the video and subscribe.